She said my need for connection was childish, but the look I saw on her face that night was anything but innocent. That's when the ground shifted under my feet, and everything I thought I knew about my marriage started to crumble. For years, I'd accepted the narrative she'd built around our intimacy, or lack thereof. Sarah always had a way of making me feel like I was asking for too much, that my desire for physical closeness, for passion, was somehow unsophisticated. She'd call it teenage angst, or unrealistic romance novel fantasy. I loved her, so I tried to believe her. I tried to mature past it. Our life together was, on the surface, perfectly normal. We owned a nice house in the suburbs, both had stable careers, and had built a comfortable routine. Sarah was a senior manager at a marketing firm, a brilliant woman by any measure. I worked in IT. We'd been married for 10 years, together for 12. We didn't have kids, a mutual decision we'd made early on, and it meant we had more freedom, more time for each other. Or, so I thought. Looking back, the emotional distance began subtly, a slow fade rather than a sudden break. It wasn't a single fight or a dramatic moment. It was more like a gradual cooling, like a fire slowly turning to embers, and then eventually to ash. I missed the warmth. I missed the spark. I missed her. I'd often try to initiate physical affection, a hug in the kitchen, a hand on her arm while we watched TV, a gentle kiss goodnight. Most times, she'd respond with a pat on my back or a quick, almost clinical peck. Sometimes, she'd just stiffen slightly and pull away, saying she was tired or busy or stressed. It became a pattern. I learned to anticipate the rejection and, eventually, to internalize it. It really started to sting when her excuses started feeling less about her fatigue and more about my desire itself. "Are you really still so focused on that, Mark?" she'd ask, with a sigh that made me feel small. "We're adults, not high schoolers. There's more to a relationship than constant physical touch, or that kind of intense passion is unsustainable, a fantasy. Real love is about stability, respect, and building a life together." I wanted to argue, to say that passion and stability weren't mutually exclusive, but I never did. I just nodded, feeling the weight of her words. She convinced me that my longing for spontaneous affection, for deep, lingering kisses, for the kind of intimacy that felt like two souls intertwining, was a sign of my own immaturity. I started to question myself. Was I being unreasonable? Was I projecting some unrealistic expectation onto our marriage? My friends, with their own relationship struggles, often spoke of maintaining passion, but Sarah's words, delivered with such calm authority, always made me doubt my own feelings. She was logical, pragmatic, and I admired those qualities in her. Maybe she was right, and I just needed to grow up. I retreated into myself, finding solace in my hobbies. My woodworking became more intricate, my evening runs longer. I poured my energy into things that didn't require emotional reciprocation. It was a coping mechanism, a way to fill the void, but it also widened the gap between us. We coexisted, two planets in separate orbits, occasionally brushing past each other, but rarely truly connecting. One evening, about 6 months before the company party, I remember clearly, we were sitting on the couch. I'd had a particularly good day at work, and I felt a lightness, an urge to share it with her. I leaned over, putting my arm around her, and rested my head on her shoulder. She was reading something on her tablet. Without looking up, she gently pushed my head off. "Mark, can you not? You know I don't like to be distracted when I'm reading." Her tone was flat, devoid of malice, but utterly devoid of warmth too. It hit me harder than usual that night. I didn't say anything, just moved away, feeling a familiar sting of humiliation. Later that week, she mentioned a significant project at work, a big presentation she was leading. She'd be spending a lot more time at the office, working late, occasionally on weekends. "It's a huge opportunity, Mark," she explained, "for my career, for us." I understood. I encouraged her, told her I was proud. I tried to be supportive, even as the little time we did have together dwindled even further. Her focus shifted entirely to work. Her phone became an extension of her hand. She was always checking emails, taking calls in the other room, or texting. When I asked about it, she'd say it was just work, demanding clients, tight deadlines. She'd get defensive sometimes if I asked too many questions, which then made me feel guilty for even asking, so I stopped. The changes were subtle at first. She started dressing differently for work, a little sharper, more stylish. She bought new, expensive perfume, which I noticed because she rarely wore any before. When I complimented her, she'd just shrug and say she needed to look the part for her new responsibilities. I wanted to believe her. I did believe her. I wanted to see it as her evolving, growing in her career. But there were other small things. Her phone, which used to lie around unlocked, was now always Face ID protected. She'd take it with her to the bathroom, which she never did before. If I happened to be near her when a notification popped up, she'd quickly angle the screen away from me. "Privacy, Mark," she'd say, with a wry smile, as if I was being nosy. It wasn't just privacy, it felt like secrecy. I pushed those thoughts down. It was just work, it was just her taking her career seriously. I was being immature, as she often reminded me, to read more into it. She was busy, stressed. My mind tried to construct a logical narrative for every inconsistency, but the seed of unease, once planted, had started to sprout. Then came the invitation to her company's annual winter gala. It was a big deal, a black tie event at a swanky downtown hotel. Sarah was excited about it, even more so than usual. "It's the perfect opportunity to network, to make an impression," she told me, her eyes bright with ambition. I was happy for her, genuinely. But deep down, a familiar dread was brewing. These events always highlighted the chasm between us. I was just the husband, standing awkwardly while she effortlessly charmed a room full of important people. I was the stable, grounded Mark, the one who didn't understand, adult passion. She spent weeks planning her outfit, choosing a stunning, deep emerald gown that she said was power dressing. She booked a hair and makeup artist, something she only did for truly special occasions. Her energy around the gala was infectious, almost like the excited anticipation of a teenager going to prom. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here she was, embodying all the youthful exuberance she often accused me of, but it wasn't directed at me. It was directed at her career, her public image, her world outside of our home. The night of the gala arrived. She looked incredible, breathtaking even. For a moment, seeing her all dressed up, I felt a familiar surge of affection, a longing to pull her close, to tell her how beautiful she was. But I knew better. I held my tongue, offering a simple, "You look amazing, Sarah." She smiled, a genuine, appreciative smile, and for a fleeting second I felt a glimmer of hope that maybe tonight would be different. Maybe tonight she'd remember the man who fell in love with her. As we drove downtown, she was humming along to the radio, her mood unusually light. She talked about the people she hoped to meet, the connections she wanted to make. I listened, nodding, trying to engage. But my mind kept circling back to her earlier comments about passion, about maturity. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was an accessory tonight, a necessary plus one, rather than her chosen partner. I was just the quiet observer, ready to witness her shine, while she, perhaps, yearned for a different kind of audience entirely. The tension in my chest tightened with every block we drove toward the hotel. I knew, with a certainty I couldn't explain, that this night would change something. I just didn't know what, or how, completely. The hotel ballroom was a dazzling spectacle. Chandeliers dripped light over tables set with crystal and white linen. The air hummed with conversation, laughter, and the soft clinking of glasses. Sarah, in her new sapphire gown, looked stunning. A natural leader, she moved with an almost regal grace, accepting compliments, exchanging pleasantries. For a moment, watching her from the periphery, I felt a flicker of pride, a sense of shared accomplishment. This was her world, her professional triumph. I was here as her support, her silent partner. We found a table near the back, a strategic spot she chose for observing the room. She introduced me to a few senior colleagues, explaining my role in IT in broad, vague terms. The conversations were polite, superficial. My presence seemed to be a checked box for her, a formality. She smiled warmly at them, but the smile never quite reached her eyes when she turned back to me. Her attention was constantly scanning the room, her energy always directed outwards, never quite settling on me. I felt like I was watching her perform. After a glass of wine, she excused herself, needing to network. I watched her go, a familiar ache starting in my chest. I understood her ambition, respected her drive, but the consistent pattern of being a peripheral figure in her life, especially at events like this, was a constant, dull throb. I nursed my drink, trying to look engaged, watching the ebb and flow of the party. I saw her across the room, already deep in conversation with a small group, her laughter echoing above the general din. It was then I noticed him. He was tall, well-dressed, with a confident posture and an easy smile. He was new to the marketing firm. I remembered Sarah mentioning a David, who had just joined as a senior project lead. They were talking animatedly. At first, it was just professional. They were colleagues, naturally discussing work. But then something shifted. Sarah's gestures became more expansive. Her head tilted, her eyes sparkled in a way I hadn't seen in years. She was genuinely radiant. I watched her, mesmerized and increasingly disturbed. This wasn't the Sarah I knew at home, the one who found my attempts at affection childish. This wasn't the Sarah who would give me a quick, almost perfunctory peck on the cheek before bed. This Sarah was animated, playful. She laughed. A deep, rich, unrestrained laugh that seemed to bubble up from a place of pure joy. I hadn't heard that sound directed at me in what felt like a lifetime. David leaned in, saying something that made her throw her head back, her hand briefly, unconsciously touching his arm. It was a fleeting gesture, easily missed, but to me, it was a seismic event. My breath caught in my throat. I saw the way their eyes held, just a beat, longer than necessary. The easy intimacy of their body language. They were standing close, their shoulders almost brushing, creating a small, exclusive bubble in the crowded room. The contrast hit me like a physical blow. The woman across the room, vibrant and effervescent, was a stranger. The woman who treated my desire for closeness as a burdensome immaturity, who met my tender gestures with polite distance, was nowhere to be seen. The Sarah I saw with David was fully present, fully engaged, radiating a warmth and passion I had only ever dreamed of receiving. The realization was sickening, a cold dread seeping into my bones. I tried to rationalize it. She was at a work event. She was a senior manager. She needed to be charming, engaging. But this was different. This wasn't just professional charm. This was genuine delight, a natural chemistry that flowed between them. I watched as David ran a hand through his hair, smiling down at her, and Sarah met his gaze with an open, inviting warmth. They were oblivious to anyone else, lost in their own world. The music, the chatter, the clinking glasses, it all faded into a muffled hum. My vision narrowed, focusing solely on them. My hands trembled slightly as I put my glass down. I felt a profound sense of humiliation, a raw, exposed vulnerability. Had I been so blind, had I so readily accepted her narrative of my childishness, that I failed to see what she was truly capable of, what she was actually withholding? It wasn't that she lacked passion, it was that she lacked passion for something else. I stood up, needing air. The ballroom suddenly felt suffocating. I couldn't bear to watch them anymore. Couldn't bear to see the woman I married be everything she refused to be with me, for someone else. I walked out of the ballroom, past the elegant reception area, and found a quiet alcove. My heart pounded, a frantic drumbeat against my ribs. I pulled out my phone, staring at the blank screen, trying to compose myself. I couldn't confront her now, not here, not without knowing what I was confronting. A few minutes later, I sent her a text, feeling a bit unwell, heading home. Don't worry about me, enjoy the rest of the night." I knew it was a lie, but it was the only way I could escape without making a scene. I waited a moment, but there was no reply. No surprise, really. She was still deep in conversation with David, no doubt. I walked out of the hotel, hailed a cab, and made my way home. The image of Sarah's radiant smile, directed at another man, burned into my mind. The apartment was dark and quiet when I let myself in. I sat on the couch in the living room, the city lights filtering dimly through the blinds. Every laugh, every shared glance, every subtle gesture replayed in my mind, each one a fresh stab. It wasn't just a flirtation. It felt like a window into a life she was living, a part of herself she had kept locked away from me. The childish label she'd attached to my affection felt less like a criticism of me, and more like a carefully constructed barrier, designed to deflect any scrutiny from her own emotional landscape. She arrived home, hours later, well after midnight. I pretended to be asleep. I heard her move around the apartment, then the soft click of our bedroom door. I listened as she got ready for bed. The rustle of clothes, the sound of water running. She slipped into bed beside me, and I felt the slight shift of the mattress. There was no attempt to check on me, no whispered question about my sudden departure. Just silence. It was a familiar silence, one that had grown accustomed to filling the spaces between us. The next morning, things felt subtly different, yet devastatingly familiar. Sarah was in a good mood, almost humming, as she got ready for work. She mentioned the gala briefly, talking about the, quote, connections she'd made, but David's name wasn't mentioned. Not directly. She seemed to float through the day, her phone constantly in hand, her face lit by its glow in a way it rarely was when looking at me. She took it with her into the bathroom, a habit that had solidified over the past few weeks. Later that week, the subtle shifts continued to accumulate. She started working late again, even more frequently than before. Her explanations were vague, citing, quote, critical project deadlines and client emergencies. She'd come home with the scent of an unfamiliar, musky cologne lingering faintly on her clothes, mixed with her new perfume. It was subtle, easily dismissed as a crowded office environment, but it was enough to make my stomach clench. Her phone was always angled away from me, Face ID always active. Notifications would pop up, and her thumb would instantly cover the screen, almost instinctively. The woman at the party had indeed been a stranger, and it was becoming terrifyingly clear that she was still a stranger, but now, a guarded and secretive one. I was no longer just feeling like an accessory, I felt like a threat. The lingering scent of that musky cologne, mixed with Sarah's new perfume, haunted me. It wasn't a strong smell, not like she'd been doused in it, but it was just enough. Enough to invade my thoughts, enough to make my stomach churn, enough to chip away at the already fragile foundation of my self-worth. Every time she came home from work, I'd unconsciously take a deeper breath, trying to discern if the scent was there, if it was stronger. It became a perverse ritual, a silent accusation against my own sanity. My mind replayed the company gala over and over. Sarah's laugh, her animated gestures, the way her eyes held David's. The easy, uninhibited intimacy she displayed with him, a man she'd known for a few months, was a stark contrast to the distant, almost clinical affection she showed me after 12 years. It wasn't just the physical distance that hurt, it was the emotional chasm, the obvious absence of joy in our shared life, compared to the vibrant energy she exuded with him. It felt like a deliberate act, a conscious decision to withhold that part of herself from me. I tried to dismiss it as an overreaction. Maybe she was just being professional, a good senior manager making a new colleague feel welcome. Maybe she was just excited about her work, and that translated into a certain sparkle. But the image of her hand lightly touching David's arm, the prolonged eye contact, the way they leaned into each other, whispered something far more intimate than professional camaraderie. It whispered betrayal. The days that followed were a blur of internal torment. I started watching her, an insidious habit born of fear. Not overtly, not like a detective, but with a heightened awareness that made every small detail scream. Her phone, once a casual object, was now an extension of her secrecy. It went everywhere with her, to the bathroom, to the kitchen while she made coffee, even to bed, placed face down on her nightstand. If I so much as glanced in its direction when a notification popped up, her hand would instinctively fly to cover the screen, a subtle but unmistakable gesture of protection. Our conversations became stilted. Any attempt I made to reconnect, to talk about our day, or even to ask about her projects, was met with a practiced aloofness or a curt, almost irritated response. "Just busy," she'd say, or "It's all work stuff, you wouldn't understand." The defensiveness in her voice was like a cold wall between us. It was as if my very presence was an inconvenience, an interruption to some hidden, more important narrative unfolding in her life. Then came the increasingly frequent late nights. She'd call or text around 5 p.m., saying she'd be home later than usual. Big deadline. Client meeting ran over. Team brainstorm. The explanations were always plausible, always vague. But they started to stack up. Sometimes she wouldn't get home until after 8 p.m., sometimes even later. She'd be tired, she'd say, and head straight to bed after a quick shower, leaving me alone in the living room, staring at the TV without really seeing it, listening to the silence of our increasingly empty home. One Tuesday I was working from home, dealing with a server issue. Sarah had left for work as usual. Around noon I decided to grab a quick bite. As I was walking past her home office, I noticed something on her desk. It was a small, embossed card, peeking out from under a stack of papers. It was a reservation confirmation from the Golden Spoon, a high-end French restaurant downtown, known for its intimate atmosphere and exorbitant prices. The reservation was for two, for a Thursday evening, 2 weeks from now. Our anniversary wasn't until summer, and we hadn't been out to a fancy dinner in months. This wasn't for us. My heart hammered against my ribs. I wanted to confront her right then, to hold the card up and demand an explanation, but the fear held me back. Fear of her denial, fear of the truth, fear of shattering the fragile illusion of our marriage completely. I carefully pushed the card back under the papers, trying to leave no trace that I had touched it. The rest of the day was a fog. I couldn't concentrate on work. My mind raced, trying to find a benign explanation for the Golden Spoon. A client dinner? A team celebration? But it didn't feel right. The card, the name of the restaurant, the reservation for two, it all screamed romance, not business. The next day, Wednesday, I found myself doing something I never thought I'd do. I logged into her work email. As an IT professional, I had the access, a back door in case of emergencies, forgotten passwords. It felt dirty, invasive, a violation of trust. But what I was living through felt like a violation of trust, too. I justified it as a desperate search for answers, a way to either confirm my worst fears or put them to rest. I found nothing directly incriminating in her main inbox. No overt declarations of love, no scandalous planning. But then I looked at her calendar. Amidst the usual slew of meetings and project deadlines, there were recurring entries, blocked off for external meeting or client presentation, always on late afternoons. A few of these entries had an additional note, almost hidden, usually just D. My stomach dropped. David. I cross-referenced these D meetings with her late nights. There was a clear pattern. The days she came home late almost perfectly aligned with these D appointments. Not every time, but enough to solidify the connection in my mind. It was a subtle breadcrumb trail, not a smoking gun, but it painted a picture of intentional secrecy. She was creating a separate calendar, a separate life, and it revolved around D. I also checked her travel expenses. There was a recent charge for a weekend trip to a coastal town about 2 hours away. It was flagged as a conference, but the dates seemed odd for a conference, starting on a Friday and ending Sunday morning. And there were 2 charges for a boutique hotel, not a standard business hotel. Again, no smoking gun, no clear indication of a lover, but it was another piece that didn't fit the narrative of a devoted wife on a business trip. We hadn't taken a weekend trip together in years. I felt like I was piecing together a puzzle with half the pieces missing, and the ones I had were badly warped. Each discovery, no matter how small or ambiguous, chipped away at my denial, reinforcing the sickening dread that had taken root in my gut. I hated myself for looking, for suspecting, but I hated her more for making me feel this way. The calm, grounded man I once was had been replaced by a paranoid, suspicious wreck. The following week, the week of the Golden Spoon reservation, was pure torture. Sarah was even more detached, her phone even more guarded. She started taking long walks after work, claiming she needed to clear her head. I tried to engage, to talk, to ask about her day. But she'd just nod vaguely, her eyes distant, her mind clearly elsewhere. It was a performance, a facade of normalcy that was cracking under the immense pressure of her secrets. That Thursday, the day of the reservation, she left for work as usual. Around 4 p.m., I saw her text come in. It was to me. "Meeting running late. Won't be home until after 9. Don't wait up." My hands trembled as I read it. The Golden Spoon reservation was for 7 p.m. Her meeting was a lie, a carefully constructed lie to cover up her date with D. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The woman I married, the woman who dismissed my desire for intimacy as childish, was out there, having a romantic dinner, displaying the very passion she claimed to despise. I was no longer just a threat to her, I was an inconvenient truth she was trying to erase. That text message from Sarah, claiming to be in a meeting until after 9, felt like a deliberate blow. The Golden Spoon reservation was for 7 p.m. My mind raced, picturing her across a candlelit table, laughing, alive, just like she had been with David at the gala. The anger was a cold, quiet thing, but beneath it, a desperate need for absolute certainty. I couldn't live with this gnawing suspicion any longer. I needed to see it, to know for sure. I left the house around 6:45 p.m. My hands were steady on the wheel, but my stomach was a knot of dread and resolve. The drive to the Golden Spoon, a notoriously upscale restaurant downtown, felt endless. I knew the area well. There was a parking garage a block away, discreet and perfect for observation. I pulled in, found a spot, and walked the short distance, trying to calm my breathing. The restaurant entrance glowed warmly, invitingly, in the cool evening air. I didn't go inside. I found a vantage point across the street, partially obscured by a large planter and the awnings of a closed boutique. I watched the entrance, my heart hammering against my ribs. Time stretched, each minute an eternity. Then, at precisely 7:05 p.m., they arrived. Sarah and David. She was radiant, her face lit up with a smile I hadn't seen directed at me in years. Her arm was linked casually through his, a gesture of familiarity and ease that was utterly foreign to our relationship. He looked attentive, charming, his head inclined towards her as they exchanged a joke before the maître d'. Led them inside. They weren't hiding. They walked in together, openly, comfortably, like a couple on a date. My breath hitched. It was worse, and yet exactly as I had feared. The woman walking into that restaurant with David wasn't just my wife. She was the Sarah I remembered from the very beginning of our relationship, the one who captivated me, full of life and laughter. The Sarah who, somewhere along the way, had disappeared. I stayed there for another hour, watching the windows of the restaurant, occasionally catching glimpses of her through the glass, animated, leaning forward, genuinely engaged. There was no mistaking the intimacy of their body language. The passion she deemed childish with me was on full display for him. I drove home slowly, the world outside feeling distant and unreal, The reality of what I had seen settled over me, heavy and suffocating. The cold anger was still there, but now it was joined by a profound sense of loss and betrayal. I felt a strange calm, too, the calm that comes after the worst has happened, and there's nothing left to dread. I parked my car, went inside, and turned on a single lamp in the living room. I didn't turn on the TV or put on music. I just sat, waiting. It was almost 10:30 p.m. when I heard her car pull into the driveway. The sound of her key in the lock, the soft click of the door, her careful footsteps in the hall. She walked into the living room, pausing when she saw me sitting there in the dim light. Her smile faltered. "Mark, what are you doing up? I texted you I'd be late." Her voice was carefully casual, but I heard the tension underneath. "I know," I said, my voice flat, betraying none of the turmoil inside me. "You said you were in a meeting." She shifted, dropping her purse onto the armchair. "I was. It ran over. Client meeting. You know how it is." She avoided my gaze, busying herself with taking off her coat. "No, I don't, Sarah," I said, my voice gaining a quiet edge. "Because tonight, you weren't in a meeting. You were at the Golden Spoon." She froze, her hands still on the buttons of her coat. The silence in the room became thick, suffocating. She slowly turned to face me, her expression a mix of shock and dawning horror. Her eyes were wide, and the color drained from her face. "What are you talking about?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. It was the standard, immediate denial. "I'm talking about you and David," I continued, my gaze steady on her. "Having dinner, laughing, looking incredibly happy, the same way you looked with him at the gala." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The weight of my words was enough. She dropped her coat. It landed with a soft thud on the floor. Her facade crumbled. Her eyes welled up, but there were no tears, only a stark, raw pain that mirrored my own. She walked to the sofa opposite me and sank down, her shoulders slumping. "Mark, she trailed off, unable to find the words. The denial had gone, replaced by a devastating silence. "How long, Sarah?" I asked, the question hanging heavy in the air. She took a shaky breath. "A few months. It wasn't supposed to happen." Her voice was tight with regret, but I heard no apology for me, only for the situation. "Wasn't supposed to happen?" I repeated, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "The late nights, the phone secrecy, the new perfume, the D on your calendar, the weekend trip that wasn't a conference, the musky cologne on your clothes, none of that was supposed to happen either." I laid out the pieces, not as accusations but as facts, cold and hard. She stared at her hands, clasped tightly in her lap. He understood me, Mark. He saw me, really saw me. He appreciated my ambition, my drive. He didn't think it was childish to want to feel alive, to want passion in my life. The word hit me like a physical blow. To hold's childish. The very word she had used to dismiss my own desire for connection, for intimacy, for passion with her. It was a cruel irony, a twist of the knife. "So my desire for passion was childish, but your affair with David, that's maturity?" My voice was laced with an anger I couldn't fully suppress now. She finally looked up, her eyes blazing with a mix of defiance and resignation. "You don't understand, Mark. You never did. You wanted a certain kind of life, a certain kind of wife. I couldn't be that for you. Our marriage, it became a cage. You wanted emotional intimacy, physical affection. It felt like a burden. It felt like I was constantly failing to be what you needed. With David, it's different. It's effortless. He doesn't make me feel guilty for wanting more." Her words hung in the air, a devastating confession. Not just of an affair, but of a complete fundamental disconnect in our marriage, and her belief that I was the one who was wrong for wanting the very things that make a marriage thrive. She believed she wasn't designed for the kind of love I craved, but she had found it elsewhere. She hadn't been withholding passion. She had been withholding it from me. "I see," I said, the words feeling hollow. "So all this time, when you said passion was childish, you meant Pulping passion was childish, not passion itself. She didn't answer, just looked away, confirming it. The truth, stark and painful, settled over me. Our marriage hadn't been lacking passion. It had been actively starved of it by her, only for her to find it with someone else, using my alleged immaturity as her justification. The years of feeling small, rejected, and misunderstood suddenly made sense in the cruelest way possible. I wasn't just betrayed. I was systematically gaslit into believing my needs were abnormal. "There's nothing left, Sarah," I said, standing up. My voice was calm, almost detached. "This is over." She flinched, then nodded slowly, tears finally starting to fall down her face. "I know." The next few weeks were a blur of practicalities and emotional wreckage. The apartment, once our shared home, quickly became a battleground of awkward silences and logistical discussions. There was no dramatic shouting match, no grand gestures. Just the quiet, agonizing dismantling of a life we had built together. We decided to separate. She moved out first, finding a temporary place. The divorce was messy but inevitable, a formal ending to what had clearly been dead for years. The reflection is a quiet one. I'm not angry anymore, not in the same raw, burning way. What remains is a profound sadness for the years I spent trying to understand a woman who had already moved on, who saw me not as her partner, but as an obstacle to her own desires. The childish passion she so disdained in me was the very thing she chased outside our marriage. I learned what passion truly meant that night at the Golden Spoon. It meant honesty, vulnerability, and a shared connection. And I learned that Sarah was never capable of giving that to me. It's a painful lesson, but it's one I needed to learn to finally find my own way forward, toward a future where my desire for genuine connection is valued, not dismissed.